I've been often asked to talk generally about women's rights in Afghanistan, and I found that a very, very difficult task to do because it's such a broad topic. Another thing that often people tell me to talk about is about myself, and that's also difficult because I don't know where to begin. It has been such a journey. I've come such a long way to be here and to be able to speak to you, to be able to go to school here. I think all of the ideas sort of connect on this one topic of education when I think of women in Afghanistan. And it connects where my life has been affected a lot by it, my family's life has been affected a lot by it, and the topic of education, the idea of getting an education, is what has led and shaped my life to become the life that it is today. The story of education in my family is actually a fascinating story, and I'll tell you a little bit about it because I find it inspiring, the story of my parents, my grandparents, and the struggles that they went through to make it possible for us to be here. My grandmother was probably the first female in my family, in my lineage, to get educated, and her education was limited to studying the Quran, the Holy Quran in Arabic, in mosques, and she never had the opportunity to go get a formal education because when she was studying, there weren't any girls' schools in Afghanistan. And then she was incredibly supportive of my father when he started going to go to school. And my dad, when the first school in our village was created for boys, my dad was one of the first guys to go to school. My grandfather taught at the school, and my grandma went through a lot of effort to prepare lunch for him, or to prepare a donkey for him to ride it to the school, or just small things that would make it possible for my father to continue getting an education. And it was incredibly difficult at that time. Getting an education up to 9th grade was mandatory for all boys at that time. But even then it was very, very difficult because there were very few teachers. Teachers hadn't been educated with the right skills to be able to teach. Often the buildings of the mosques were used for schooling, so there weren't even the right buildings, the right equipment for students to be studying. And then about 20 years later, my mom started going to school. She was one of the first women in her village to go to school, and same with her sisters. And my mother and her sisters ended up being the first female students the first female teachers in their village. And I think it was their journey that really made them realize the impact of education in their lives. And I think as a group of people who are certainly a little more privileged, who are able to come to excellent schools such as Lafayette, it's lost on us the hard work and the difficulty on even the privilege of having the right to get an education. When my parents gave birth to 4 daughters, and this was when the Taliban, in 1996, the Taliban took control of Afghanistan, and they banned all schools for girls. My mom and my dad, both educators, couldn't continue their work, and certainly neither me nor my sisters could continue going to school or could go to school. I hadn't even begun 1st grade yet. So we moved to Pakistan, and I remember how difficult this journey again was for my parents. What a big sacrifice it was for them to leave their house, to leave everyone they loved, to leave all their family, to leave everything that they had built, a family, a house, all of that, to leave that behind in order to go to a different country and be refugees, just so we could get an education. We were in Pakistan for about 6 years, and during that period we learned to speak English, we learned computer skills, and most importantly, we created a learning center for other Afghan refugees to learn the same skills. So I was about 12, and I remember teaching my first class. I taught people to type on the computer. And some of my students were twice as tall as me, probably much older than me. And I remember one of my students carried me to class once. So it was really amazing for me to have that opportunity early on. And I think what it did to me was it allowed me to see the impact that I was having, despite being very young, on other people. The impact I was having on empowering them, on allowing them to have the skills that would get them employed, allowed them to have the skills that would get them to have better opportunities in their societies, in their communities, and as refugees, which was really a big thing, given refugees lived in such hard situations in Pakistan. So in 2001, we returned to Afghanistan, and I remember going to Kabul. I was 12, and I remember the entire city smelled like bullets. I remember walking to school with my mother. I had never seen my mother in a burqa, and she was wearing a burqa because there was a lot of propaganda about how they would throw acid on our faces if we continued going to school. But I remember my first day at school, and I was in 6th grade, but I couldn't be in 6th grade because there wasn't enough space, because there were so many girls there to get an education. So I had to repeat the 5th grade. But I remember being in that setting, being around all those women, being in a position where I could see a lot of love and passion for education. And I've seen this passion traveling throughout Afghanistan. Some of the photos here are from a trip I took to Faryab last summer, and I was able to see women who had been attacked in the past, women whose schools had been burnt down, women, female teachers who had gotten threats, female teachers who had gotten letters on the way to school that they should stop going to school or pay a part of their salary to the Taliban in order to continue to get an education. And all of them had this zest, this energy, this passion to continue doing what they were doing, to continue getting an education. That was incredibly powerful to me. People often ask me if anything has really changed in Afghanistan. Two specific things in regards to women comes to my mind. In 2008, a group of 13 students were attacked by the Taliban, 13 students and female teachers. They all had acid thrown on their face for the basic right of getting an education. That night, most of them were interviewed on TV and asked, would you continue going to school despite the fact that this happened? And they all said, every one of them said that this will never change their passion for education. It will never stop them from going to get an education. And you would think it was rather irrational that in a country where you can face harassment for going to school, where you can face death for going to school. Last year, a 12th grade student was killed basically just for vaccinating children against polio. In a country where you could face numerous kinds of challenges, why would you still continue going to school? In a country where only 19% of the schools are for girls, why would you continue doing that? Why would you put yourself in such risk? And I think it's because Afghan women and men who support them have learned a very, very important lesson, that even sometimes our policymakers, our governments, they have lost it. They haven't been able to notice it. And that is, education is the key to empowerment. Today, Afghan women make 30% of the teachers. They make 35% of the general total percentage of people who are working of the workforce. They make 25% of the governmental employees. Numerous Afghan women are in the media or journalists. Many Afghan women are now in the police forces. Actually, yesterday was the election in Afghanistan, and around 13,000 female police officers were working to secure election voting stations for women. Afghan women have understood that it's their education that allows them to make a voice in the country. We have more than any other time girls going to school in Afghanistan, more than any other time in our history, the number of girls who are enrolled. That's around 4 million girls. And we have largest number of students being university students. Women make about 25% of university students in Afghanistan. All of these might not sound like such drastic achievements. In fact, we all know that women in America now make 51% of college students. But it's drastic if you think about the fact that back in 2001, the number of women going to schools was 0. The only women who had education was because of the underground schools that their teachers were running, and they didn't get a diploma for it. They were not enrolled. Their schooling was not official. It wasn't formal. And they had to do it despite the threat of death, of being killed by the Taliban. So these are amazing accomplishments, and things that I think Afghan women are very, very aware of. I think there is this tendency to assume that countries in that area are stuck in the past, that they're static, that their cultures are backwards, that people are not trying hard enough to change things. And my point through giving this talk, I hope the one message you take from it is that that's not the case. Women in Afghanistan are doing everything they can to get an education, to be empowered, to be agents of change in a country where we have been living in war and conflict for 40 years. And this is not just apparent in the statistics, it's apparent in the everyday struggles of the women that I've met, in the everyday struggles of my own sisters and my mother, and the struggles of my father in supporting us and continuing his support despite lack of support from the society, despite the fear of being ostracized by other men around him. I often also hear, another thing that I hear about women in Afghanistan is that that we as a group of people are all, that there isn't any hope for us, especially with troops withdrawing from Afghanistan. And I think in regards to that, I just want to say that the women who are getting education, the women who make these percentages that I talked to you about, have done so much to prevent Afghanistan from being a Taliban government again, to prevent Afghanistan from going back to being an oppressive system towards women. Health for women has increased tremendously. Maternal mortality has been brought down to half of what it was before. Women have much more access to education, to jobs, to security, and to upward mobility. And I think all of these points are not irrelevant to the United States. I don't think the fight that Afghan women are fighting for education is irrelevant to the United States. I have been here for 6 years. I came as a junior in high school, and it was because individuals provided me and institutions provided me with support. They were generous enough to support my education here, and I know at least 25 other women who are here in the US because they have gotten a scholarship. And I know that all of them are committed to going back to their countries and bringing the kinds of changes that we are all hoping will come about. And I think that it's not irrelevant to talk about a system in which we can support each other in creating a more empowered group of Afghan women, a more empowered movement for women's rights in Afghanistan. I want to use this opportunity to thank people who have invested in my education and the education of other women. And I also want to say, let's not imagine that the war for equal access to education is one that only belongs in countries like Afghanistan or Pakistan or Iran. People in America are struggling to get an equal access to education. People in America, based on their skin color, based on their class position, don't have the same opportunities that we as a privileged group of people, and I say privileged despite the fact that I come from a war zone, because we are privileged to be here, don't have. America is investing more money now in creating prisons than it is in creating schools. Only last year, around 100 schools in Philadelphia were closed. The question of creating quality and equal education for everyone is not one that only third world countries have to fight, only developing countries have to fight. Women in Afghanistan have a long journey to fight so that we have more percentage of girls graduating from high school and from colleges. People in America have to fight to create better opportunities for education for other people, for people who are of a lower class, for people who are of different races and of diverse backgrounds. And I see this every day. I see it in my own college that people are struggling to make it more diverse, to make it more open and more hospitable to students from other backgrounds. But I think that should be a focus. Education has been in Afghanistan a tool for empowerment of women. I've seen the power of it and how women who make their own monies, make their own decisions, choose their own husbands, know how to train their children to be better agents of change in their society, and it's the same thing here. Education can be a tool for empowerment, to make our neighborhoods safer, to make our schools more equitable, to make our classrooms more diverse and more educational and more open and hospitable. I think often what happens is when we talk about education, we imagine either a village in Africa or a village in Afghanistan where schools are burnt down or where there aren't schools and clean water. But I think putting the question of education and equal access to education as a tool for empowerment, in that way, othering it, distancing it, prevents us from getting the education that we really want to get. Less diverse classroom is much less educational. It's much less effective in teaching our daughters and our sons the place that they have in the world, the role where they fit in the world, the different perspectives that exist around them. And I think this is very, very relevant to America as well as it is in Afghanistan. As women in Afghanistan struggle with their male supporters, struggle to create better educational opportunities, to make universities safer, women in America need to do the same. Women in America need to focus on creating universities that are safer, creating college campuses where they're blamed less for sexual assault, or not blamed at all, in fact. And as women in Afghanistan are trying to create ways where urban women and rural women all have access to education, equal access to education, and to quality education that doesn't just fill us with information, but fills us with passion and with yearning to make the world a better place, with yearning to be better individuals. People in America also need to focus on creating equitable access to education around the country, so that all of us, all the children of this country and other countries, so that all of us have access to a tool that will really empower us, that will change our families, change our societies, and change our countries. I think we can all do a little bit for this to come true. I know that there's a lot more that goes into empowerment, but I think a really, really good starting point is creating equal access to education. Thank you.